This is Wild Nevadacast from the studio at PBS Reno in Reno, Nevada. I'm Dave Santina, and I have today with me Evert Broderick, a longtime instructor at TMCC in herbal studies. And may I call you an expert in Nevada medicinal plants and wild edibles? Is that fair to say?
Oh, God. Sure, go ahead.
As much as of an expert as exists?
Right.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. You're here because we have an intern named Allie who did a great job of preparing ideas for the podcast, and she found this idea of foraging, which I had never considered, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Is that even a thing? And so she started researching, and here we found you, and you're all over the place. You've got articles over the years. We saw you recently on Channel 2 in Reno being identified as someone to know because of your work in teaching people all about medicinal and edible plant life. And so I thought, well, we should talk about this stuff. So because to me, it's one of those things that I would never even consider it. It scares the hell out of me to even think about it.
Smart man.
Thank you. But you can, I understand, forage if you want to out there. Is that true?
So, yes, but I think I have to qualify that foraging in modern times really is a way of deepening your relationship with the environment.
Okay.
Where if you're out for a hike, if you're backpacking, camping, whatever, it's really not too practical anymore to think that you're going to actually live off the land.
Yeah. So my fearful fantasy of being trapped in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone, no vehicle, and having to live off the land is maybe not not very likely.
Probably not realistic.
Okay. Fair enough. So. On Wild Nevada in the series, we had a couple of experiences where we dealt with some wild edible plants. One was on the Tri-Point Trail. We were hiking from California, on the California side, north of Cedarville, east to the point where Nevada, California, and Oregon all meet. And there's a monument there. And so on the way, our guide pointed out a couple things. One was a plant she called biscuit root. I think that was the
Lomatium,
Lomatium, and then something else called Yampa.
Uh-huh.
And we tried. I think it was the Yampa, and it was a root. And she peeled it off. She said, "You can eat this. It's kind of like a carrot or like a beet, And so we did eat that, and that was the only way I would ever do it was with the person who knows best sitting there, right there, saying, "You can do it." But it was an interesting experience. And then one other time we were at Echo Canyon State Park on the east side of the state, and I tried, just Mormon tea, which I know is, I'd seen that before, but I've never gotten anywhere near. But I did take a taste of that, which didn't taste like much of anything, but it did make me it did make me make a face because it had a little bitterness to it.
It's very bitterness and very astringent. Yeah. But it's not made for eating.
Okay. Yes. For
tea
boiling, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So that was my sum total of experiences with edible plants, and I'm good with that. I don't need to go any further, but I am really curious about the fact that there are people who would try to go out and really make an effort to find the edibles. So what is is there a safe way to do something like that, or is it just a bad idea in general?
No, there is a safe way, and that's through education.
Okay.
Learn plants. You don't really go into it learning specifically edible plants, but just learn plants. Become good at identifying plants. Once you know how to identify plants, it's easy to find information on whether a given plant is edible, medicinal, or potentially toxic. But if you don't know what the plant is, all the information in the world about it doesn't do you any good.
Yeah, no kidding.
So education.
Okay, and you've taught for years this exact information, right?
I did, both at Truckee Meadows Community College. My wife, Kim, and I had I think for 4 years, we did a program called the Herbal Studies Program. It was what do they call it? Not a degree program, but there was a certificate involved with it.
Okay.
And it was like 200 hours of different coursework and field trips. But then also I've done just independently workshops and field trips for the last 30 years here in the area.
Okay. So is that still happening?
No, I've given just because of certain family obligations. I no longer am able to continue doing that.
Sometimes life gets in the way.
Sometimes life gets in the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where would you recommend people go to begin educating themselves about this kind of stuff?
Well, again, as I mentioned, educate yourselves about plants, not just about edibles. And a good way to do that is there's an organization called the Nevada Native Plant Society.
Okay.
And during the spring, summer, and fall, they do walks, field trips, which you don't have to be a member. They always encourage membership, but you don't have to be a member to go on the field trips.
Okay, so Nevada Native Plant Society.
Nevada Native Plant Society.
So look them up and find when the opportunities are there, and then go out and experience it. Can you do much educating of yourself through a sort of solo means?
You can. It's and it's a good way to do it. It's tricky though. You have to be able to really pay attention to details, because there are a lot of lookalikes, and most field guides are not particularly good as far as identification goes. Most field guides are photographs. For a given plant, there's usually one photograph, and that just sometimes just doesn't even begin to cut it.
Yeah. So can you give me a couple of examples of like the kind of lookalikes that people need to look out for?
Okay, so here's an example. One reason I no longer really encourage people to forage unless they really know what they're doing. About 3 years ago, the last time I did an in-person workshop, we were out by the river, the Truckee River, across from the Patagonia warehouse. Great area for plants. We did a lot of our walks there because you had the river, the ribbon of river where a lot of water, but then you had the dry lands up above, and you had the urban interface where there were lots of edible weeds.
It's a nice spot. Yeah, I've been over there.
There's a plant I talk about every time we're out there. It's called poison hemlock. Poison hemlock is an introduced plant. And it's considered to be one of probably the two most poisonous plants in North America.
Wow.
It's in the carrot family. The foliage looks a lot like a young carrot.
Oh, that's scary.
I mean, but it's a very different plant. Poison hemlock will grow 7, 8, 9 feet tall.
So you'll know pretty quick it's not a carrot.
You'll know pretty quick. However, has a group of people in the workshop. We're standing around looking at poison hemlock, talking about some of the identification characteristics, and I always encourage them to smell it. And we dug up a root, and the root looks very much like a carrot. It's a big conical taproot.
Okay.
And there was a young guy in the workshop that day who was one of those kind of gung-ho guys. I mean, he'd obviously been doing this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, he knew a lot, and he was very interested and always taking notes. And as I'm talking about poison hemlock, I can see he's getting uncomfortable. And then he almost like gets pale. And he said, "I was out by the river the other day, and I gave that to my friends. I thought it was wild carrot."
Oh, no.
So again, it's toxic, but I mean, you'd have to eat some.
Okay.
Hopefully they didn't eat enough, because I never found out from him if any of his friends died or not.
Oh, jeez. Oh,
but I mean, this was a young guy who was pretty into the whole foraging thing, knew a lot. Obviously thought he knew more than he did.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, that could have potentially lethal implications.
Yeah, it's so easy to.
And supposedly, poison hemlock is responsible nationwide, because it grows probably in all 50 states now, for poisonings on a regular basis. It has hollow stems, and supposedly little kids cut the stems and use them as pea shooters.
Oh wow! And don't even realize it.
Yeah, I don't know how many deaths result from it, but poisonings are not uncommon.
Yeah. Oh. See, this is why I don't go outside
and eat plants. But you don't know.
Well, oh man, you just gave me a flashback. You know, we've done on a couple of occasions, we've encountered nettle, stinging nettle, and for me it was, I had a couple of experiences where it was annoying, it was irritating, it itched, it was, you know, and it lasted for maybe an hour and then it went away. But for Chris Orr, who was the co-host on Wild Nevada for the first 6 seasons before she's now doing it on her own, it's a lot more complex. It's a lot more severe. She had a very strong reaction to it. Maybe an allergy, I don't know. But the first time we ran into it was on like maybe the first show we ever did, if I'm not mistaken, up Eastgate in the central Nevada, and I remember it was really, really difficult. Like, and I had felt it for about an hour. It went away. She had it for quite a long time, and I realized how different individuals can have a different reaction to a different plant. And so, just one more layer on top of it of why I should be terrified.
and nettle is actually one of probably the most supremely edible plants in our area.
Oh, really?
But you need to know how to process it properly. It's not difficult, but you need to know how to process it.
Okay.
But I mean, it's just for soups. I mean, eating raw, ravioli, nettle ravioli.
Really?
I mean, it's great.
All right, you just made me perk up. Now I'm kind of interested when you throw ravioli into the mix. Now we got a thing that I might want to try out. Okay, I'd be up for that. So what are the most common edible plants around here, or is it fair to say safest? I don't even know if that's a proper description.
So what I want to do as we're talking here is steer people away from going out into the wilds and harvest. If you're just learning, not steer them away from the wilds and steer them into urban territory.
Okay.
I think it's the best place to learn edible plants.
What makes that better?
Well, there are a lot of the weeds that we have all around us are edible.
Oh.
And part of that is the reason for part of them being here is because early Europeans intentionally brought these plants with them. Things like dandelion and a whole host of others. They were intentionally brought with early colonists because they were edible, medicinal, had use for fiber, a whole host of reasons. And once they got here, just like the European culture, we spread like a plague.
Yeah, right. So, and that reminded me just now of something I'd read on your website. That in days gone by, there was a lot more here that was edible than there is today. Correct?
Yes.
Or that it's changed.
It's just changed. I mean, environments have been degraded. That's one of the reasons that indigenous peoples, not only have they lost a lot of their indigenous knowledge, but the plants simply aren't as available in the abundance necessary for sustenance.
Okay, so even more reason why my fear fantasy of being trapped in the middle of nowhere is not going to work out because there's just not enough to sustain a person.
That's partially true. Yes.
Okay, well, I'm just going to not try it. That's no matter what. Even if you say it's abundant, I'm not going. But so the over the years, the kind of plant, the kind of edible plant in this area has changed. Is that what I'm understanding?
No, it's just environments have changed, and so environments that have traditionally been abundantly harbored edible plants are disappearing.
Okay.
I'm sure you've read the book Into the Wild.
Oh yeah.
Just keep that in mind.
That actually came up yesterday when we were talking about this subject. That McCandless, Chris McCandless, right? And went off and tried to live off the land, and no one ever they saw him again, but he was dead,
not alive. Yes.
Yeah. And so that's to me is the perfect sort of warning to people. Don't assume that you can do this easily.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, what level of education does somebody need in order to realistically think they could survive?
So you're going back to survival again,
versus thriving, right?
Versus thriving, and versus as I started out by saying, I really feel that modern day foraging for urbanites, is really a way of deepening your relationship with the environment you're in.
So really, we shouldn't even be thinking in terms of surviving. It's more like learning and I don't want to say experimenting because that sounds dangerous, but but self-educating.
Self-educating. And if you go out into an environment, I mean, face it, I mean, all animals, we have a couple of really fundamental drives, and eating is one of them. And so we're always on the lookout for something to eat. And if you're in an environment and all of a sudden you know there's something to eat there, that plant becomes your friend.
Right.
And anytime you're out anywhere, the more friends you have, the better time you have. So if you're out walking, you have lots of friends all around you. You just enjoy yourself more.
Got it. That makes sense. I mean, I like hanging out with my friends.
Exactly. Right.
So yeah, all right. I don't bite them though, not usually. Okay. So what are the rules that people should consider if they're going out to self-educate?
So once again, I'm gonna go back to urging people to, if you're going to start foraging, start in the urban environment, because many of the plants that are easily recognizable are edible. And not only easily recognizable, I mean, just about everybody knows what a dandelion looks like. It would be very, very difficult to say, well, I think that's a dandelion. I'm not sure.
They're pretty obvious.
Pretty obvious.
Even to me, ignoramus.
But also, our common weeds, if somebody wanted to get that identified, they can take those plants to any reputable nursery. And there's going to be somebody there who would say, beyond the shadow of a doubt, yes, that's a mustard, that's a dandelion, that's chicory, that's whatever.
Okay.
So they're easy, and plus most guidebooks will include those plants. And again, since they're easy to identify, they can pretty reliably be found in a given environment. I think they're best to start with.
That makes sense. So yeah, so take them somewhere before you do anything. Take what you find.
If you're unsure at all, right? Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And my understanding is beyond instructing over the years, you also a bit of a photographer, right? You have a plant photography bent.
That was, yeah. I'd like to think so. Yes.
Yeah. Are your photos visible anywhere? Can people see them?
I have a website. It's long neglected, just barely hangs on. I haven't done anything with it for 3 years now, but I have quite a few of my photographs on the website.
And that's Taking Root?
Taking that with the hyphen, taking-root.
So taking-root.com.
Right.
And then on that website, you can see your photos. I did see some. I was there recently, and they are gorgeous. So I think you deserve to call yourself a photographer.
Thanks.
You've earned it. Yeah. Do you have a favorite location to go photographing, or is it just what happens in your?
Yeah, just out and about. So
as it comes to you.
Right.
Yeah. Well, the ones I saw were gorgeous. So you've got a good eye, and I appreciate it. Well, you of all people, you should know the best angle of a plant. Another thing I read off that website I wanted to ask you about was there's a quote. I think it was there's a quote from the website. Ever since, this is how you got started. Ever since an inauspicious epiphany involving a dandelion some 40 years ago, plants have been my guiding passion. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Now I have to find out what happened with the dandelion 40 years ago. So
I was lying on a lawn. So first of all, let me step back years and years. I went to Reno High School, and I took sophomore biology. Bob Condi was my biology teacher. And one of the things we did towards the very end of the year was he taught us a little bit about botany. It wasn't in depth in botany, but we had a botany session.
Okay.
And for the very final, and we learned to use what's called a dichotomous key. A dichotomous key is what any serious botanist uses to identify an unknown plant. There's no pictures, or there may be drawings, but it's primarily words. It's a complex process. We got introduced to a dichotomous key, and the very final exam was a plant was out there, and if we were able to identify that plant using the dichotomous key, we would get an A in the course, regardless of what our previous grade was.
Nice. Okay, and that's a good incentive.
It was a really good incentive, and myself and one other guy were the only two that did it. So that's the foundation for the epiphany. Years and years later, I'm lying on a lawn somewhere. I don't remember where I was. I don't remember what state of mind I was in. But I started looking at a dandelion, just casually looking at it. And I started tearing it apart and looking at it more closely. And I noticed that rather than being petals like on a regular plant, that those were individual little flowers in there. And this word came back to me from my high school biology class. I said, composite. This is a composite. And I understood for the first time what it meant by a composite. It was composed, that what looks like a flower is composed of numerous dozens, if not hundreds, of individual flowers. And it just said, aha. And that was it. Because it was unauspicious.
And then you were hooked.
I was hooked.
And then from that moment on, you were self-educating.
Well, self-educated, yes. I actually went. I graduated from UNR, but with a degree in German. I started going back to UNR and taking botany courses.
Okay.
And the one that was really the pivotal point for me was a course called Plant Systematics, and that's where we learned how to use the dichotomous key. And
okay, so you were really self-motivated from that day on.
Yeah, so self-educated to some degree, but self-motivated. Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's really
interesting.
interesting.
And that's what, if nothing else, that's what I would really urge people to develop, is self-motivation to learn what's out there.
Well, I feel inspired to make a better effort on my own. So thank you for coming in and talking about this. I appreciate it. Before we go, you had talked when we first made contact about you coming in. You had talked about a recipe for a tea, right? Was it a tea? It was a recipe that you were going to share with us
for chokecherry jam.
Thank you. A recipe for chokecherry jam. And so I'm just curious. I maybe don't need to go through the whole recipe here, but just generally, in brief, how do you make jam out of a wild plant?
Well, in the recipe that I'm going to give you, that I guess people will be able to find on your website.
Yeah, we'll put it up.
The very last statement I make is this is going to consume hours and hours and hours out of your life. It's a long, long process. First, the harvesting of the cherries, and then the cleaning, cooking, canning. It's a long process. Chokecherries are really abundant in our area. They're harvestable. They're fully ripe and harvestable usually September, sometimes October.
Okay.
They're easy to identify. They'd be really difficult to mistake with anything else.
That's encouraging to me.
Yeah.
I need it to be easier than harder.
And fresh chokecherries, they're an acquired taste. Once you acquire the taste, it's kind of. You ever watch somebody sip bourbon or something?
Yes, and they
look like they're really enjoying it. I've never figured that out, because I think it's ghastly stuff, no matter how old it is or how expensive. But they've acquired the taste.
Right.
And chokecherries are kind of like that. Once you've acquired the taste, you're kind of addicted to them.
Okay.
But chokecherry jam is a whole nother realm. Chokecherry jam, I think, may be the single best preserve I've ever had.
Wow, that's saying something.
And it's a process, Harvesting, you have to clean them, you have to cook them, you have to mash the pulp through a colander, then you cook it again, then you go through the canning process. It's a long, detailed process. But I mean, any canning is.
That's true. I assume I've never made jam of any kind, so I don't know.
You're missing out. You have to make some chokecherry jam this fall.
I'm semi-inspired at this moment. We'll see how I feel later, but
okay.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. I do want to taste one now. I've never tasted a chokecherry, so I'm going to have to learn how to do that.
I don't even think I've got some left over at home. I'll drop some by the station for you to try.
I would definitely appreciate that. Okay. But yeah, so we'll put the full recipe on the website and on the notes in YouTube and in all the podcast distribution outlets, wherever they go. We'll put it in the notes so that it's visible. And if you're listening now or if you're watching on YouTube, you can give it a shot. I think that would be really fun to know how it turned out for you. I am inspired to take a serious look at this. So thank you. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Before we go, any last words you want to impart to a listener, viewer about the idea of going out and we'll say self-educating?
So since I've really stressed using the urban environment as a place to learn because of plants being plentiful and recognizable, one thing you do have to be aware of, obviously, because we humans have a tendency to use all sorts of nasty things in the environment.
Chemicals.
Chemicals, yeah. So be aware. Just be aware that not every place the plants are growing may be the best place to harvest them. So use some common sense.
Gotcha. Smart. Okay. Thank you for that final word of wisdom. I appreciate it. Before we go, I want to mention to everybody, watch Wild Nevada on PBS Reno. That's via broadcast or streaming at pbsreno.org and many other streaming sources. Also, watch the segments on PBS Reno's YouTube channel. And if you have a question about Wild Nevada or maybe a comment or a suggestion for this podcast or any other podcast that we do, send them to me at podcasts@pbsreno.org. I want to say thanks to Ali Ruland for coming up with this idea, and my thanks to Evert Broderick for coming in today. And thank you for listening to Wild Nevadacast.